at a couple of minutes while we have people joining us. So please just sit tight and we'll start as soon as possible. Okay, I think we've probably waited long enough. Thanks, everyone, and welcome to today, the second International Day of Clean Air for Blue Skies. This International Day was mandated by the United Nations General Assembly in December 2019, and it was to raise awareness on the impacts of air pollution and drive international cooperation to actually resolve air pollution issues and what is now considered one of the greatest environmental threats to health, a threat to our climate, and also a threat to sustainable development. I'd like to make a special thanks to the Republic of Korea and Germany for their generous financial contribution to this important International Day of Clean Air for Blue Skies. My name is Andrea Hinwood. I'm the Chief Scientist of the United Nations Environment Programme, and I'm very privileged to be here today to moderate this event. Air pollution is a significant environmental and health issue. The evidence is overwhelming that air pollution affects the young, the old, the vulnerable, but even those who are healthy. It can affect the environment, it can affect agriculture, and of course, in a warming climate, heat plus air pollution equals more air pollution and more climate change. So we have a great opportunity to actually deal with a number of issues by tackling air pollution, but the most significant of which is the health of our population. We have the tools to actually address these problems, and that's why it's such a pleasure to be here today, this second International Day of Clean Air, and to talk about the sorts of things that we might be able to do to actually resolve this problem and what we must do urgently to solve this issue. So before we get started, we've got the rules of participation. This is being broadcast on YouTube today. All participants are muted, and we'd like you to ask questions, but please submit them through the Q&A box. I think we've all got used to this medium, so hopefully everyone knows how to use the Q&A box. Please put your name and ask your question, and we'll try to get it answered. Make sure you also indicate what panelist or who you would actually like to answer the question for you. We'll try to answer as many as possible, and we'll also possibly try and group some depending on how many we get. So what we're doing today is we have some leaders of international organisations who are going to talk to us about this issue of clean air for blue skies and air pollution. And in particular, we've got the Executive Director of UNEP, the Director of Public Health, Environmental and Social Determinants of Health with the World Health Organization, and a video message from the Vice President of the World Bank. This will be followed by some short presentations highlighting the importance of policies and actions on air pollution, including air pollution legislation, human and social capital, the critical issue of funding, and of course, government's experiences and achievements in air quality action. And after this initial statements, we will actually move to questions and answers. And I'd like everyone to be as engaged as possible by submitting their questions and any comments. We'd also like to hear from you as well. So first speaker today, it's my great pleasure to introduce our Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Programme, UNEP, Ms. Inga Anderson. She and UNEP are facilitating the celebrations of the Clean Air Day in collaboration with a wide range of agencies and stakeholders. Inga is an economist and an environmentalist with a passion for conservation and sustainable development. She's got more than 30 years' experience in international development economics and has held the position of Director General of the IUCN and held a number of senior positions in the World Bank. She served as UNEP's Executive Director since 2009. It's my great pleasure to welcome Inga to the floor. Please, Inga, thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea. And it's obviously my great pleasure to be in your panel today. And to the colleagues from around the world who are here from a variety of organizations, it's a real pleasure. This matters because the International Day of Clean Air for Blue Skies really reminds us that healthy air and a healthy planet go hand in hand. And right now, our air is, as we will talk about today, far from healthy. You've heard many of these often quoted statistics. Over 90% of us breathe dirty air. Atmospheric pollutants cause half of the global warming. But new research from University of Chicago brings the issue right into sharper focus. The quality life index found that the average person loses 2.2 years shaved off their life from air pollution. So air pollution shortens life more than smoking, it would appear, more than alcohol, more than narcotics, more than road traffic accidents, HIV and malaria. So we have made air that keeps us alive the number one threat to our health. But just as we caused the problem, we can fix it. And improving air quality will also have a major impact on the climate crisis, on which the IPCC recently issued what the Secretary General referred to as a code red. And that's because sources of air pollution are often the sources of greenhouse gas emissions. And we're talking here of fossil fuels for power, particularly coal, of course, transport, industrial facilities, and so much more. Now, we all know exactly what to do. If nations invest in greener solutions, in abatement through the pandemic recovery packages that are rolling out right now, reducing pollution, choosing renewables, choosing electric mobility, setting the guardrails for that at the policy level, deploy that in our cities, then the air gets cleaner. If at COP26 nations up their game and reflect their net zero emissions and accelerate efforts, then the air gets cleaner. If we act on methane, which we understand very well is a potent climate warming gas that contributes to pollution ground level ozone, then the air gets cleaner. If in fact, according to UNEP's global methane assessment, if we reduce methane emissions by 45% by 2030, including through actions by oil and gas industry, we will prevent 260,000 premature deaths. We prevent 775,000 asthma-related hospital visits, and we prevent about 0.3 degrees Celsius of global warming. So friends, we're getting there, but we still have quite some way to journey. A new UNEP report on actions on air quality in more than 190 countries found encouraging progress in most of the polluting sectors. Many countries already have constitutional provisions for the establishment of rights to clean air. Incentives or policies promoting cleaner production also exist in many countries. Clean energy programs for residential cooking and heating exists. More sustainable agricultural practices are being rolled out. Regulations on open waste burning do exist. The world is finally free of leaded petrol, which was a major contributor to dirty air. More countries are adopting emission standards equivalent to the reference Euro 4 or higher. And resolutions on clean air at the UN Environment Assembly and this day itself also shows that awareness and action are growing. Here, let me thank particularly the governments of Republic of Korea and the governments of Germany for their financial support for this day and their commitments to international cooperation on clean air. But persistent policy and capacity and implementation gaps impair more impactful action. The first global assessment on air pollution legislation was launched just last week. And here we found that countries are lagging in creating and enforcing ambient air quality standards, even if they have them on their books. Over a third of the world's countries have no legally mandated outdoor air quality standards, and at least 31% of countries with powers to introduce such standards have not used them. 60% of countries, accounting for 1.3 billion people, have no routine annual ground-based monitoring of PM 2.5 at all. And meanwhile, European countries on average invest 0.25 to 1% of GDP in environmental protection. So we could do a lot better. So on this International Day of Clean Air for Blue Skies, I call on everyone to act. Public institutions and governments can adopt policies and legislation, invest in an implementation, and hold polluters to account. Industry and the private sector can not only respect the law that does exist, but above all, go beyond that to contribute to a clean environment and lean in where they can. And civil society and individuals around the world can promote and adopt lifestyle changes that will enable cleaner air. And of course, we can demand cleaner air from our elected representatives whom we choose to run our countries. If we do all of this, we create healthier and more productive lives by cleaning the air and slowing climate change. And in the context of the COVID-19 recovery, investments in air quality will enhance our health, but also job creation and energy efficiency and clean transport and sustainable agriculture and obviously green and resilient cities. We can't clean the air overnight, and we can't clean the air without the full engagement of every sector of society. But if we put the work in today, we can, one day soon, all breathe a little easier. Thank you so much, Andrea. Back over to you.
Thanks, Ingo. Great remarks. It's my great pleasure now to introduce Dr. Maria Nera. Maria is with the World Health Organization, and she will be speaking next. Have we got Maria? No, I'm not sure we do. So we actually might move to introduce Dr. Jürgen Voyager, who's the Vice President on Sustainable Development with the World Bank. He can't be with us in person today, but he has undertaken a video message for us. So since joining the World Bank in 1991, Dr. Voyager has held several senior positions. He assumed his current position on April 1, 2020, and in this role, he oversees the work of global practices and thematic groups that bring together the best expertise from across the World Bank Group and from partners to help countries tackle their most complex challenges in the area of sustainable development. We have a video to show you, so please bear with us while we put it up. Thank you.
Dear Ingo, thank you very much for welcoming the World Bank to today's gathering. I'm very happy to join you, Director General Ghebreyesus, and all participants to mark the second International Day of Clean Air for Blue Skies. The links between our environment, climate, and the well-being of people and economies are clearer every day. Shocking weather extremes, natural disasters, and even the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic make us see how our ability to take care of our work will determine our future. And the links between environment, climate, and our own well-being are clearest when we look at the case of pollution. We know that we cannot achieve a world without poverty, and we certainly cannot have a world that is green, that is resilient, and that is inclusive without tackling the problem of air pollution. Air pollution is estimated to cause 7 million deaths per year, nearly 95% of these in low and middle income countries. Vulnerable groups, children and the elderly, low-income communities tend to be the most exposed to air pollution. People's living conditions, their access to medical treatment, and the resources that they have to cope with shocks also affect the impact of pollution on people's lives. Pollution can increase levels of deprivation, knocking many back into poverty and increasing the depths of poverty for those who are already poor. But air pollution is not only the world's leading environmental risk to people's health and well-being, it also imposes great costs on economies. A 2021 report we recently published estimates that the global cost of exposure to air pollution in 2019 was $8.1 trillion, equivalent to over 6% of the global GDP of that year. And much of the loss was in poorer countries and communities. Air pollution also contributes to climate change, of course, since short-lived climate pollutants, greenhouse gases, and air pollutants are emitted from the same sources. The strong links between pollution, well-being, the economy, and climate also means that we can help address many seemingly unrelated problems by reducing pollution. We have seen, for example, that improving air quality reduces school absenteeism, as children suffer less from asthma. Improving air quality reduces healthcare costs. It leads to stronger human capital and more economic productivity. Improving air quality even makes cities more competitive. At the World Bank, we're doing a lot to help countries and communities address serious air quality problems. In the past 20 years, we have invested more than $16 billion in tackling air pollution. Now, one good example that we're particularly proud of actually comes from China, from Hebei province. Hebei is one of the largest agriculture producers in China, and emissions from the agriculture sector there were considerable. By 2013, nitrogen fertilizer application was 5.5% higher than the average rate in China, which was already about 30% higher than the world average. It accounted for over 70% of all chemical fertilizers applied in wheat fields. The use of this fertilizer resulted in significant ammonia emissions, which then became secondary sources of PM 2.5 when ammonia reacts with sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxides. We therefore work closely with Hebei province to increase the efficiency of nitrogen use in 6 million hectares of farmland. So the farmers tailored fertilizer application rates to soil and crop needs, reducing losses, and as a result reduced PM 2.5 emissions substantially. Tsinghua University estimates that the 40% reduction in PM 2.5 in Hebei province between 2014 and 2020 may have contributed to preventing 7,000 premature deaths in this province every year. We have a lot of examples like this from across the world, but we still have much more work to do. We need to find a way to address pollution for the billions of people that still breathe dirty air. Some of the most urgent actions that we must take include first, establishing networks for monitoring air quality and short-lived climate pollutants. This can help us have the evidence to improve air quality management plans and policies. And of course, the technology that's recently become available helps a lot with this. Second, we also need to prioritize the control of air pollution coming from fossil fuels, such as coal burning and diesel-fueled vehicles. This can, of course, also address climate change. And finally, we need to make sure that we work with policymakers to incentivize decarbonization and reduce pollution through policies. This can include dialogue to repurpose funds, the use of funds currently being used to subsidize fossil fuels, for example, but also repurposing agricultural subsidies, as we've just heard from the case in Hebei province. In closing, let me thank our partners, UNEP and the World Health Organization, for the opportunity to join you today, and let me thank our government leaders and technical partners for all the great work that you are doing. Thank you all.
I think, thank you very much, Dr. Voyager. So I think lots of great pointers as to what we're going to talk about in the next hour. And so I'm going to move to our next speaker, Gary Kleinman, a senior environmental expert focused on air quality and climate planning, who supported state and national governments' action. Mr. Kleinman has more than 2 decades of experience developing methodologies, tools, and curricula to demonstrate the multiple benefits of reducing emissions of greenhouse gases, short-lived climate pollutants, and traditional air pollution simultaneously. He has held several assignments with the World Bank, the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, and UNEP. He is one of the main authors of the UNEP report, Actions on Air Quality, a global summary of policies and programs to reduce air pollution. Gary, globally, how successful have we been in taking action to address air pollution? What are some of the most significant and immediate measures that need to be taken to address these issues?
Thanks so much, Andrea. Thanks for having me and UNEP colleagues as well. Thanks for inviting me to be part of Clean Air Day. If we can put the slides up, the report Actions on Air Quality tries to address that question. It is a good question. How successful have we been? And it's not, it turns out, completely straightforward to answer. in order to try and understand our progress and the key measures that have been most effective at curbing air pollution, our colleagues at the UN Environment Program surveyed countries all over the world to try and answer that question. So if you go to the first slide, in terms of context, I think, can we advance to the, thanks. I don't think we would be here today if most of us on the call didn't already know these top line statistics. I mean, 7 million premature deaths every year, or nearly 7 million, which in turn imposes a significant drag on our economies, especially in the low and middle income countries. The question is, what do we do about it? So following the adage that you can't manage what you don't measure, UNEP was tasked by UNEA to start tracking the actions taken by governments that we know are most effective at reducing air pollution. The first assessment was carried out in 2016. And this report that we're launching today updates that progress by countries around the world in addressing air pollution. If you go to the next slide. Thank you. Increasingly, we found that more and more governments are taking action that we know can be effective. This chart shows our survey data indicating the number of countries that have met specific policy targets. Those are shown in green. The orange and the yellow indicate where partial progress has been made. And red indicates countries that have not met the specific policy targets for a given sector. Notably, we're missing data still for many countries, which indicates a lack of progress in its own right. But what we do see is that from reducing industrial and transportation emissions through efficiency measures, to restricting open burning, to providing clean fuels for cooking and heating, many countries have adopted some of these key actions. Also, in addition to enacting specific measures, countries are also starting to develop the tools and the regulatory framework for managing air pollution. And this, as we'll see, is really key to ensuring that the progress is continued and strengthened. If you go to the next slide. Thank you. We found progress in all major polluting sectors over the past 5 years. So this chart shows the net increase relative to the 2016, when we asked countries before. We see the number of countries that have adopted our industrial policy goals in the first column. The number of countries over and above what we had surveyed in 2016 that have vehicle emission standards in the second column. Then next, residential cooking and heating goals. And then some form of open burning regulation. So for each of these sectors, we see that progress has been made. Agriculture is not shown here. We talk about it in the report, but that was a new question for the 2020 survey that didn't exist in 2016. So we don't have a net progress to be showing at this point. But despite this progress, what we also noted is that there are still large gaps in areas related to implementation, like enforcement of these regulations, financing, technical capacity, and monitoring of air quality. Because of all of these barriers, air pollution levels have not progressed as quickly as we see some of these policy adoptions taking place. In fact, air pollution has remained relatively unchanged, or in some regions of the world gotten worse. Just one example of these barriers, among 124 countries that have air quality standards in place, only 57 of them have continuously monitoring air quality. In fact, there's still 104 countries that may not have any monitoring infrastructure in place. So there's still a lot of progress that needs to be made. Next slide, yeah. What do we do about these barriers? Where capacity gaps remain, I think it's critical that we provide the tools and the resources that countries need to take action. But I think we also need to be meeting countries where they're at and providing these resources at an appropriate level of engagement. I think that will enable science-based decisions that ultimately will save lives, improve quality of life, as Inger indicated, while providing food and energy security and boosting the economy. Bottom line is that while progress is being made, it needs to be stronger and it needs continued support from the international community in terms of capacity, but also financing, which I know some of the other panelists will be speaking to today. So thanks so much for having me. And if you advance to the last slide, it has a link that shows UNEP's resource page, where you can find more information and a link to the full report, so you can learn more about everything that's in there.
Thanks, Gary. It's certainly a very interesting report, and I'd really encourage people to ask some questions of Gary. I've got a few that I might ask later. We'll now turn our attention to our next speaker, Dr. Eloise Scotford, Professor of Environmental Law in the Faculty of Laws and Centre for Law and Environment, University College, London. Professor Scotford is a leading scholar on the legal treatment of environmental principles, air quality law, climate change governance, waste law, and legislative processes as they relate to the environment. Professor Scotford is also the co-author of the recently launched UNEP report, Regulating Air Quality, the first global assessment of air pollution legislation. So I'm going to get in first and ask you a question before you give your presentation. One of the key findings of that report was that 34% of the world's countries have no legally mandated outdoor ambient air quality standards. And where such laws exist, the standards vary widely and often are much higher than the World Health Air Quality Guidelines. What's the role of governance in both implementing existing legislation and addressing the issue of standards that are not protective of human health? Thanks, Eloise.
Thank you very much, Andrea. A great question, and one that I knew that was coming, so I've thought about my comments in response. So the role of governance in implementing existing air quality legislation and developing more ambitious standards is really not to be underestimated. And the premise of this report, co-authored with my colleague, Professor Delphine Mizon at Université Saint-Louis in Brussels, is that law creates a policy and administrative architecture within states and governments for embedding and for achieving air quality standards, so for governing air quality. And we can think about air quality governance in at least 4 dimensions. There's how legislation and laws contain or empower air quality standards. I'll talk about this image in just a moment. So the kind of 4 dimensions is how we can, how laws contain or empower air quality standards, and what the standard setting process is. Who's involved in setting air quality standards, how transparent it is, what factors need to be taken into account, the level of ambition in forming that process. But all of that can be constructed in law. Then we can think about air quality governance in another dimension. And Gary kind of mentioned the issue of monitoring, but how robustly air quality is monitored is also something that can be designed through law. And that's how you see if standards are being met. Moving beyond that, we think about who's responsible or accountable for achieving air quality standards. What planning and policy coordination processes are required to meet air quality standards, what enforcement mechanisms and sanctions there are available if air quality standards aren't met. And then a 4th dimension is thinking about the rights of the public. So to information on air quality, to accessing justice if standards aren't met, for being involved in the setting of standards in the first place. And there's a real danger if we just think about air quality standards in law, that we just think about the headline standard and whether it's in a legal instrument, and that's important. But it's this whole governance system that is important. Now, this image, this figure is in our report. It's our conceptualization of air quality governance and the components of it, with air quality standards sitting at the heart of it. And those dimensions of air quality governance I just mentioned as kind of the green bits at the top of this circle, and we really get into them in the data and the analysis of our report. The other bits, the grey little segment there is important as well. That's about reviewing air quality standards over time. And as scientific knowledge progresses, as country circumstances change, as their policy direction, their investment, their politics change, that process of review and of reviewing law is really important. Law can become static, it can become fossilized. So this idea that there is review built in to air quality governance and standards is very important. That black section is about policy and regulatory mechanisms that deliver air quality standards. And that's the kind of things I think Gary's report has got into in a lot of detail. And it's where we often think about air quality policies. What can we do in transport? What can we do in agriculture? What can we do in planning? What can we do in industrial pollution control? And all of those things are really important. And that we see them as that segment of a bigger picture of air quality governance. And then these orange bits are thinking about constitutional guarantees, air quality objectives, and the level of ambition that we inject into the standards to make sure that they are promoting clean air. So if we could go to the next slide, please, that would be great. I wanted to mention a few other headline findings in the couple of minutes I've got remaining. This flipping the statistic that Andrea posed in her question is that in a more positive way. So a headline kind of finding is that 64% of countries we found around the world have legally mandated ambient air quality standards. The ones that don't, some are countries that are in the process of introducing them. This is a very dynamic area of legal development in many countries. Others have standards that are not legally embedded, which means that there's not the same legal architecture around them. And there is a significant minority of countries that do not have any air quality standards at all. We found that processes for setting ambient air quality standards are often not transparent or accountable or accessible, which is an issue if you're thinking about how standards could be rendered more ambitious. Most countries, as Andrea mentioned, have some and one or more ambient air quality standards for one pollutant or more than one pollutant that do not meet WHO guidelines. It's the pollutants covered by the guidelines that we considered in the analysis and the research for our report. We found that 37% of countries have no legal requirements to monitor air quality. More than that do monitor air quality, but there's not the legal structure saying how and when and where necessarily that monitoring should happen. This final point is really important. 33% of countries impose requirements on government to achieve ambient air quality standards. Now that's a much lower percentage than the first percentage on this slide, which shows that there may well be ambient air quality standards in law, but there's no requirements on governments to meet them. So they're kind of bare legal standards, if you like. If we can move to the next slide. This idea of institutional responsibility being quite weak tracks the challenge around enforcement that Gary mentioned. Is not that there aren't always enforcement mechanisms present, and that's certainly true, to enforce ambient air quality standards, but there's also a real challenge in designing enforcement mechanisms to meet, to ensure that ambient air quality standards are met. And that's because air pollution is a collective problem. There are many different kinds of sources. Those sources are unpredictable. And so it is a coordination challenge to bring together the different sources of pollution and control them to achieve ambient air quality standards. So unlike other areas of environmental regulation and control where enforcement mechanisms are normally about sanctioning an individual operator through a standard method of environmental control, there's a much more difficult coordination problem for meeting air quality standards. And that means designing enforcement mechanisms, usually against the state, can be quite complicated in some countries. The other point I will mention here on this slide, because I'm conscious of time, is the last one, which is the real dearth of legislation around indoor air quality standards. That's something that is moving up the agenda in some countries. It's certainly an area where a lot of work is very important, but not a lot of law. And then the final slide, please. Just a couple of reflections on the global picture to finish, which is reinforcing this point that many countries are in the process of developing or reviewing air quality law. And that's actually a really good thing, that there is an ongoing, as I mentioned, process of review. But there's a very heterogeneous approach to embedding air quality standards in law around the world. And that's about different ways of designing air quality standards. It's different air pollution challenges, it's diverse legal cultures, which means that comparing between the countries is a bit of a research challenge, but it also means that in some cases, because standards are designed very differently, they can mask a lack of ambition. There's lots of rooms for exceedances, for territorial fragmentation, and that means that actually some air quality standards can mask weak ambition and in fact legalise unclean air, which is a problem. There is an issue, as Gary mentioned, around institutional capacity and resource to build in to air quality governance if it's there in its architecture, which is a problem. And finally, just to there's work to be done on indoor air quality, as I mentioned, and transboundary air pollution as well. But once you have legal standards for air quality, that's really important. The ambition's important, but that's not enough. More needs to be done to have a full system of air quality governance that's robust to ensure the achievement of clean air. That's all from me.
Thanks, Eloise. That's fantastic. And of course, these reports are available and I'd encourage people to look at them. So our next panelist is my colleague Pushpam Kumar, who is the Senior Economic Advisor for UNEP. He's previously worked as the Chief Ecosystem Services Economics Unit. He's been instrumental in the operationalisation of the concept of natural capital through flagship projects like Vantage, which is the evaluation and accounting of natural capital for green economy. And he's been the co-author of a number of scientific papers. Pushpam has certainly been teaching me a lot about human and natural capital, and I've got somewhere to go. Please take the floor, Pushpam.
Thank you, Andrea, and thanks, colleagues, friends. When we talk about, measuring sustainability, the science is out. And the science says that instead of relying upon GDP or other measures, it is better to focus on inclusive wealth per capita and how it is changing over a period of time. In fact, the latest kind of verdict has been from UK's HM Treasury report done by Sir Partha Das Gupta. And many other reports have been saying that we have to focus on inclusive wealth if we really want to know how we are doing. And in that context, inclusive wealth has three components. Of course, produced capital is one. The second is human capital, and third is natural capital. When we talk about human capital, and human capital has two attributes, health and education, one of the biggest driver which influences the magnitude of human capital is pollution. And that was the reason that a group of scientists and scientific institutions, including some of the colleagues from Boston College and T.C. Chan Medical School and many others, we wanted to explore that how pollution is impacting human capital. So the demand for such work came from the countries, and India was one of the countries who said, okay, let's try to see that how pollution impacts human capital of India, and of course, what is the general impact of this pollution on the economy and sustainability. The other countries came from Africa, Rwanda, Ghana, and Ethiopia. In fact, the report, which I'm going to share one or two findings from, was just out in the morning. So if you are more keen to know about the methodologies and further findings that how pollution is impacting human capital, please refer to the report. Although both from Africa and India, the reports have been published also in Lancet Planetary Health. I'm going to say something about that in a minute. Can we go to the next slide, please? So,
Okay, looks like we may have lost Pushpam. Pushpam, can we get you back or not?
I'm back.
You're back. Terrific. Thank you.
I'm sorry. So I don't know where I got disconnected, but I can continue from what I have been saying. In 2019, around 6.7 million people died premature due to air pollution. Coming back to India, which is one of the most polluted countries, unfortunately. 99% of the Indian population live now under the condition where the WHO guideline is exceeding as far as the pollution is concerned. Going back to Ghana, Ethiopia, and Rwanda, they all are experiencing the level which is exceeding again the WHO guidelines. Now, talking about the mortality and morbidity, we can see that 1.1 million deaths across Africa is happening due to air pollution. 1.1 million in 2019. That is the latest data we have. And 1.67 million deaths alone is in India, again in 2019. Of course, Indian population is much higher than entire Africa. Entire Africa is around 1.2 billion, while Indian population is 1.4 billion. So it's not surprising that even in the number of deaths arising due to air pollution, India is exceeding the entire Africa. Now, what it means in terms of impact on human capital. Can we go to the next slide, please? Now, when we talk about Indian situation, again, this is the paper I was referring to, which came out of UNEP's report. Indoor air pollution or household air pollution is on decline, but other, ambient ozone pollution and ambient particulate matter, they are on rise. So that has to be noted. Next, please. Next slide. So, the links between the air pollution and the human capital. Why human capital? Because human capital is one of the important constituents of sustainability indicator called inclusive wealth. Now, health and cognitive functions underpin human capital and development, and both are impacted by air pollutions. Ill health affects human capital by directly impacting the constituents of well-being, not only the material minimum, but also security, the psychological well-being, there are findings coming nearly every week that what kind of anxiety or depressions and different variants of mental health are being impacted by air pollution. So, but it also impacts the human productivity, their wage earning potentials, and also decreasing their life years, what the scientists call DAL is disability adjusted life years. And there are many other variants. So these are the pathways where pollution impacts human capital. In adults, you have cardiovascular diseases or also neurovascular diseases, a stroke, lung cancer, diabetes. You have a long list. But in children, what is shocking, and now the science is again out, low birth weight, premature birth, and IQ performance. And there are also scientific studies coming. Inger was referring to some studies coming from Chicago, and there's chain of studies showing that there is a huge impact of PM 2.5, for example, on IQ of the kids. And remember, for a developing country, LMICs, children are big assets. And if their IQ is impacted, it will have huge, enormous impact on human capital and hence sustainability. Next slide, please. Yep. So the report which has been uploaded in the morning and which is coming in Lancet Planetary Health, this is Africa report I was referring to for 3 countries, of course, Ethiopia, Ghana, and Rwanda. Just to give you some number, 1.16% of GDP in Ethiopia, nearly 1% in Ghana, and 1.2% in Rwanda are impacted by air pollution. In percentage terms, it might look a bit low, and of course it is low. Absolute number is very high, but please remember, we had severe limitations in terms of data and impact. So this number is the lower bound of the estimate. This does not capture all the comprehensive impact of air pollution on human capital, but still it is very, very high. In India, again, 37 billion annual damage is done in terms of three factors. One, productivity loss. Second, medical bill. And third, the productivity loss in agriculture and in other sectors. There are other impacts like IQ. There are physical dimensions to it, and they are mentioned, but we have not been able to capture in terms of economics. Now, why we are talking about economics? We are talking because decision makers invariably face trade-offs. The same resource can be allocated for school building or for the warehouses or for other kind of activities. Now we have to convince the policymakers, look, what you are going to spend on pollution control is not expenditure. It is, I can see Maria is here, so that's good. So investment, it is investment which has a huge return. And with that, I will come to the final slide. Carlota, the next slide. Thank you. So air pollution, air control can reduce the disease, avert premature death, and extend productive life for millions, which our other fellow panelists have eloquently mentioned. Second, colleagues, it will be helpful if you can mute yourself, please. Thanks. Air pollution control is not an expenditure. This point needs to be noted down, but it is an essential investment in sustainable futures. And finally, action on air pollution will yield positive return on investment and boost the economy, move it in the sustainable direction. I mean, that was the hypothesis which the team, the group of scientists, which was led by UNEP, had in any case, but the estimate, the hardcore number also supports at least from 4 countries, India, Ghana, Rwanda, and Ethiopia, that the expenditure on pollution control has huge return, and it can really help in pushing the economy in the direction of sustainable development. I think I would stop here, Andrea. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Pushpan. I'm sure people will have questions for you, and please don't forget to use the Q&A and put forward any questions so that you can ask any of our panelists. We're very fortunate now to be joined by Dr. Maria Nera from the World Health Organization. Dr. Nera is well known to many of us, and she has worked on cholera control, has worked on control, prevention and eradication of diseases since 2005. Dr. Nera has held the position of Director of the Department of Public Health and Environment for WHO. And before joining WHO, she obtained extensive field experience working in Africa for UNDP. She has a number of distinctions to her name. She's been awarded the Medal of the Order of Merit by the National Government of France, the Spanish National Nutrition Strategy Award, and she's currently a member of the Royal Academy of Medicine of Asturias. Maria, please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and apologies for this inconvenient logistics today. I'm afraid I'm on a very noisy place because we are talking about clean air. I am in the north of Spain, where they are celebrating as well the Clean Air Day. And for them here, it means a lot because this region was very much dependent on coal. They engage in a decarbonization with all the, as you can imagine, issues related to economy, how to ensure a more just and fair transition. Some people were thinking, and they still think, that the economy was much better when they were still using the coal mine. And fortunately today, everybody's in agreement that you can have a blue sky, a good economy, and of course, protect the health of the people. Here, the health of the people was very much affected because there were many cases of chronic respiratory diseases and of course asthma. And I'm so pleased to be celebrating this here today because it's a demonstration that if you put a political commitment and if you put, of course, some resources, financial resources, but if you invest on a different source of economy, more sustainable, and you move on a transition, on an energy transition, we can rid off of those fossil fuels and then ensure a more renewable, clean, modern source of energy that will protect your lungs. I think it is time to stop with those fossil fuels. It is time to accelerate on a very ambitious and quick way this transition to clean sources of energy. And this, we need to do it for the economy, we need to do it for our society, but we need to do it for our health. The more we postpone this transition, the more we will have death and disease in our shoulder. And this is something that we cannot accept. I'm very happy to be part of this collaboration with our colleagues from UNEP. We join all of your efforts for fighting for a cleaner and better world without pollution. As you know, for us, this is a public health battle. Now that we are trying to recover from COVID-19 and trying to learn the lessons from that, the lesson is very clear. Unless you stop this battle with nature, unless we stop this use of fossil fuels, and unless we stop to pollute whatever we touch, because as humans now we are polluting everything, water, air, food. Unless we stop to destroy ourselves, we will not be able to recover as a society, and we will not be able to have a good economy. So I will be committed to promote as much as possible, and in all fronts, on the legal front, on the advocacy front, on the advocacy, of course, on the academic and scientific way, mobilizing all the societies, and of course, mobilizing the public health community at large to make sure that everybody will understand that climate change, air pollution, and biodiversity loss can be addressed at the same time. I was very happy to join as well, Jane, this morning on this Champions for Clean Air and join for children, protect the children's future. And I think it's the minimum we can do. So as WHO, we will be very, very much mobilized. On the 22nd of September, we will be launching the new air quality guidelines. There are a lot of expectations. There are a lot of people is very committed to hear what are the new recommendations, and we need to put ourselves all the political weight that we can as different organizations to make sure that the countries will adopt those standards as a minimum. And then we will start to monitor the benefits for the health of the people. And that will be an enormous satisfaction and a fantastic way to celebrate next year Clean Air Day, counting how many lives we were able to save. Thank you very much for this opportunity. And again, apologies for all the logistics and bad connection and everything. Over, thanks.
Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for providing those words. And I know we're all very much looking forward to the revised World Health Organization air quality guidelines. So very much looking forward to that date. Thanks very much, Maria. Okay, our next panelist is Jane Bursten. She's Executive Director of the Clean Air Fund. Before setting up the Clean Air Fund, Jane worked as Head of Climate and Energy Science for the UK government, where she was responsible for the UK greenhouse gas inventory and a £45 million science program. Previously, as Head of Energy and Environment at the National Physical Laboratory, she managed a team of 150 scientists working in air quality, greenhouse gas measurement, and renewable energy. Jane was named as a Young Global Leader by the World Economic Forum. It's an absolute pleasure to have you today, Jane, and we're looking forward to hearing about your flagship report, The State of Global Air Quality Funding 2021. Thanks very much.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for inviting me, and thanks, Andrea, for the introduction. So whilst the slides are going up, I'll kick off with an explanation of what this report is about. It is the only global analysis of government and philanthropic investment into projects that tackle outdoor air pollution. And it looks at official development funding, including bilateral aid and development banks, and it looks at funding through non-profit foundations. And in a nutshell, the headline is that despite marginal increases in funding over the past 5 years, much more needs to be done by funders to counter the harms caused by air pollution. As you can see from this chart on the right here, mortality due to outdoor air pollution is diverging significantly between aid recipient countries and others. 153% increase in deaths in aid recipient countries between 1990 and 2017. And over that same period, a 30% reduction in other countries. So we can see that deaths and illness from air pollution can come down if the money is spent looking at these other countries, but there is a pivotal role that official development funders and philanthropists can play in starting to close this gap. But unfortunately, the gap is not closing. If we move to the next slide, the reality is that the issue of air pollution continues to be chronically underfunded and overlooked. As many of the speakers have said, we know that outdoor air pollution causes significant number of deaths globally every year. And as well as those shockingly high deaths, it causes millions of people to suffer from illnesses that reduce their quality of life. But still, despite that, air quality makes up less than 1% of official development spending. Only 11% of that is grants, the rest is loans, primarily infrastructure loans. And bilateral development agencies spent just 0.2% of their total finance on air quality projects. On the other side of the slide, you'll see philanthropic spending, where the picture for air quality is also very low. Air quality makes up less than 0.1% of philanthropic spend over the same period. The funding from philanthropies is steadily rising, but from this incredibly low base. So at the current level of increase, it would take another 8 years even to surpass $100 million a year in annual funding. And we're going to need much sharper increases in funding to tackle this growing issue. And what you can't see from these charts, but another interesting piece of analysis that can be found in the report is the profile of these philanthropic funders that are contributing to the topic. More than 3/4 of them, it was about 77%, are from foundations that have a climate change program. And that really surprised us because of this huge public health issue as well that could be tackled by reducing air pollution. We would recommend that funders with other focus areas such as health start to step in here because they're in the minority. Another way of putting these numbers into context is to look at the level of funding per years of healthy life lost. And a couple of the other speakers have mentioned the report that came out a couple of weeks ago on how much air pollution is reducing our healthy years of life. Our report found that the funding per healthy years for HIV and AIDS, for example, is 217 times greater than it is for outdoor air pollution. And now this isn't prioritizing one issue over another. We're absolutely not saying that funding should be shifted from one thing to another. It's about increasing the size of the pie overall and underlining that air pollution has probably been a blind spot for many governments and funders. So moving on to the next slide, another of the major headlines that we found is that official development funders are prolonging fossil fuel use. Some development funders are exacerbating air pollution by funding projects that contribute to pollution rather than that reduce it. And in fact, in 2019 to 2020, official development funders spent 21% more financing projects that prolong fossil fuel use rather than projects with a primary objective of improving outdoor air pollution. These projects are mostly focused on building and maintaining fossil fuel power plants and are located primarily in Asia and North Africa. And there's some case studies of those, as well as some case studies of the sorts of projects that can reduce air pollution in the report. I mean, all of this is shocking and crazy because we cannot realize the 2030 agenda without clean air. So if we move to the final slide. These are the SDGs that air pollution has a big impact on. And air pollution has absolutely no place in the future in which we're working towards these goals, from good health and well-being to sustainable cities and communities. We really need clean air to achieve all of these. Something that we found is that some countries are really being left behind when it comes to funding. Countries in Latin America received just 10% of the total official development funding between 2015 and 2020, and countries in Africa received just 5%. It's a similar story for foundation funding, where Africa, Latin America, and Asia received less than 4% of the total funding period over the same period. So we really need to absolutely tackle and work in countries where pollution is already incredibly high. But we also need to focus funding on countries that are rapidly developing, especially rapidly urbanizing, and target funding towards where pollution is highly likely to be a major problem in the future and is beginning to be a major problem now. I'm personally very shocked by the lack of attention that clean air funding gets, because it can achieve multiple wins. Something that Maria and others have mentioned, we've got this clean air dividend, if you will, which unlocks multiple benefits across health, across mitigation of climate change, childhood development, equity, and, as Pushpan was saying, the economy as well. So you can achieve many goals by investing in air quality. And one of the things that we recommend that development agencies in particular look at is having specific air quality themes, because we hear that it's quite hard to do things that cross-cut health and climate when the funding is siloed. So our report gives a number of other recommendations as well for funders to implement, things like increasing overall funding levels rapidly, stopping all investments that prolong fossil fuel use, and on the foundation side, encouraging diverse foundations, not just climate foundations, to work on the issue. I can post the link to the report in the chat, because there's quite a lot more data in there. And we have a launch event for it where we'll go into a lot more detail on the 23rd of September, to which you're all cordially invited. To explore that further, you can check out the Clean Air Fund LinkedIn page for more details. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. That's terrific, and very interesting results that would be good to actually follow up on, and I'm sure people will be asking some questions. Finally, we've got two people from two government areas to share their views on what they've heard so far, and also tell us what they think are the key ingredients for successful air quality action at national and subnational levels. And it'll be interesting to hear them talk about key gaps and challenges. And I'd just like to ask our organisers, unfortunately, Juliet Kabira has to leave. So if she can have her presentation next, that would be great. Juliet is an environmentalist with many years' experience in REMA and the Ministry of Environment for Rwanda, the DG for Climate Change at the Ministry in 2017, and the REMA DG since 2020. Juliet is the Director General of the Rwanda Environment Management Authority, to which she's been appointed. Prior to her appointment, she held the position of Director General of Environment and Climate Change at the Ministry of Environment. She served as the chair of the Executive Committee of the Multilateral Fund of the Montreal Protocol in 2019 and 2020. Juliet, please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for the introduction, and thank you, UNEP, for inviting us to be part of the clean air discussions today. I want to share a journey, you know, that Rwanda is taking towards beating or attending to air pollution. If you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. The next slide, we'll talk about the legal framework. We'll talk about the, you know, the drivers, what we need to have in place in order to be able to work towards clean air. Next slide, please. Yeah, air pollution in Rwanda. I think here I want to share some numbers, some statistics. It's a genuine problem. Some other presenter has already, you know, shared this already. 2,200 deaths in 2012 were attributed to poor ambient air pollution. And in 2015, there are so many hospital admissions that were caused by, you know, air pollution, and these were as high as 3.3 million people. Next slide, please. And because of that, maybe to a step backwards, the pollution is mainly caused by burning of wood and charcoal for cooking, transport sector, which is heavily dependent on fossil fuel, and power generation activities. Next slide, please. Yeah, because of what we just saw, the statistics that were alarming, the government embarked on developing a robust legal and policy framework. In 2016, we got our very first law on air quality and prevention of air pollution in Rwanda. This comes in as a very specific tool to aid government to do enforcement and compliance monitoring from the different sources of air pollution. We also ended up with standards. We played a role in developing the East African ambient air quality standards and emission limits, which were adopted by Rwanda as mandatory standards. And this go into the details of talking about the different permissible limits from the different sources of pollution, be it industries, and from other sources where that are known to be causing air pollution, from machines that are stationed or even machines that are mobile. Yeah, we also have we have developed and adopted Euro 4 standards, all these coming in as tools to help us to enforce and implement the standards that we need for a healthy living. Next slide, please. So without collaboration, there is no way you can be able to enforce the said regulations. So we are very thankful for the working relations, good working relations and collaborations that we have with different enforcing agencies, such as the police, the traffic police. These help us to conduct on-road emission inspections on cars that are picked out of the circulation randomly to basically test and see if these cars are polluting or they're still under the allowed permissible limits. If you're found to exceed the limit that you're supposed to be at, depending on when the vehicle was manufactured, you're advised to go to the motor vehicle inspection center and go through the maintenance until you pass the tests. Cars, small vehicles do roadworthiness tests twice a year, but other big carrier vehicles are requested to, small cars do the test once a year, but carrier vehicles do the tests twice a year. And in the inspection, in the motor vehicle inspection, we are looking for air pollutants like carbon monoxide and so on. So the traffic police plays a very big role And we are looking at more and more improvement in the fleet that we are having and compliance. We also have a collaboration with the Rwanda Standards Board, which run a coke stove testing laboratory. And this is aimed at making sure that the coke stoves that we have are tested for efficiency. So we are looking for tier 4, tier 5 coke stoves because we know that they're going to reduce the amount of biomass that is used and eventually cut down on the emissions from the cooking process. Next slide, please. As someone has already mentioned, if you cannot measure something, you cannot be able to manage it. So we have developed an air quality monitoring system, and this helps us to get real-time data from the different stations where the air monitoring sensors are located. These sensors are located in 23 different sites across the country, and they're able to bounce data in real time so we can know the main pollutants and their level that they're at. We also have a very strong political will supporting us to be able to enforce these standards. We have car-free Sundays twice a month, and this is trying to educate, raise awareness, push for behavior change to encourage people to walk or to use non-motorized transport systems. And this is supported research. We collected the data from this monitoring system to see the difference between the pollutants between these car-free Sundays and ordinary Sundays. And as you can see in the graph, the green line shows the data of PM2.5 that was observed on a car-free Sunday, and the red line shows the concentration of PM2.5 on a regular Sunday. The difference is big, and this was to make a case that if we can do more and more of less internal engine combustion transportation, we can be able to clean the air. And then the private sector is coming in strong, and this is a very exciting time for us to see the VW bringing on mobility solutions, which instead of selling vehicles, they are selling mobility. This encourages carpooling. These services are dependent on electricity for fuel instead of fossil fuel. We have electrofitting of motorcycles into electric motors. And then we also have, the last mile bicycles, which are being used and lent and shared by the community. So all that, we are very optimistic that we are riding towards cleaning the air, because we are able to monitor the quantities, we are able to monitor the pollution that we have. We are looping in the private sector, which is transforming the entire transport system. And we are also pushing for public transport systems as opposed to individual vehicle transportation. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Juliet. Much appreciated. Okay, and our final panelist for tonight is Jae Young from the National Institute of Environmental Research. She's the Director General of Climate and Air Quality Research. She's currently working for the Korean Ministry of the Environment as the Director General of Climate and Air Quality Research. In addition to her work experience over the past 2 decades, she's held senior positions at United Nations Office for Sustainable Development and the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, where she led various capacity building activities to assist countries' implementation of internationally agreed sustainable development goals. I'm sure you look forward to hearing her insights. Thank you, Jane.
Andrea, thanks a lot for your kind introduction. I'm very honored to participate in this important event commemorating the 2nd International Day of Clean Air for Blue Skies. Andrea asked me and Juliet, what would be the key ingredients of successful air quality action, and what would be the key gaps and the challenges to improve air quality. I'd like to share a few slides on Korea's current status and key actions to tackle air pollution. Next slide, please. As you can see in the air quality trends in South Korea, air quality in general is getting better, but the main issues have been changing over the period of time. Like there was London smog in 1940s, in Korea, in 1980s and 90s, sulfur oxide was the major concern, as the use of coal and the high sulfur oil increased. Since early 2000s, the nitrogen oxide and the ozone became more prevalent and critical issues, like in the case of the Los Angeles smog in 1970s. The 2013 is very important moment and the turning point for the Korea's air quality management policy. Next slide, please. As WHO announced that the particulate matters cause cancer, the government of Korea had to introduce immediate and the strong policies to address public concerns on particulate matter, the fine dust. Since 2015, almost every year, new plans were established to tackle the fine dust problem. The government spending on the fine dust problem increased 30 to 40% annually, and it reached almost $2 billion last year. And also two legislation on the fine dust problem has been passed. The most significant and challenging task was making more stringent the environment standards for PM 2.5 because natural background concentration of dust is already high in Korea. Due to comprehensive fine dust control measures, the concentration of the PM 2.5 decreased to 25 in 2017, 23 in 2018 and 2019, and 19 microgram per cubic meter last year. It is a dramatic improvement during the short period of time, but still more work needs to be done to meet the standard of Korea, 15 microgram per cubic meter. Next slide, please. Out of the many the key measures to tackle fine dust, I'd like to share two main key measures taken by current government. First, previously, only a few hundred facilities in the Seoul metropolitan area took part in cap and trade scheme for air pollutants. Now, more than 1,000 facilities taking part in cap and trade system to reduce emissions. Another important measure is seasonal management system for PM 2.5. When heating starts in Korea and in neighboring countries in the wintertime, Korea experiences multiple high concentration air pollution episodes. So starting December up to next March, Korea puts extra efforts to cut the emission and protect the people from the harmful air pollution. Interestingly, China has similar systems starting from October to next March. It is one of the good examples of collaborative actions to reduce air pollution in the region. In order to manage disastrous level of air pollution, we set 3 stages of alarm system. And we also established the central emergency control tower to coordinate the actions within ministries and local governments. For example, for power and industry sector, coal power plants are being shut down temporarily in the season. And for transportation sector, highly polluting vehicles such as the old diesel car are not allowed to enter in the designated areas. Vulnerable groups such as outdoor workers are provided with free masks. Next slide, please. One of the challenges with air pollution is that there is no boundary in the sky, as former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon mentioned. One country cannot solve all the problem. We need the collaborative action. Scientific data are the key to build mutual trust and the collaborative action. And that is what National Institute of Environmental Research, my institute, is doing. Korea and China started Clean Sky project since 2016. NIR and Chinese counterpart jointly established research center to conduct ground monitoring and modeling. NIR launched the world first geostationary environment satellite. The observed data on major air pollutants are being shared already. And NIR is conducting joint project with NASA, EASA, and many countries to better utilize satellite data. We call it CJAP project. We also have a Pandora project to support Southeast Asian countries to monitor air quality by installing ground monitoring station and providing the environment satellite of data of the region. My final point is that I would like to reiterate the importance of the what Inger mentioned in her remarks. Air pollution and climate change is very much interlinked with each other. Climate change made the meteorological condition more prone to air pollution, especially in the Northeast Asian region. Air pollutants stays longer due to the reduced wind velocity and the air movement caused by climate change. And Korea shut down the old coal power plant to tackle fires, and it also contributed to a lot to carbon emission reduction. Lastly, I'd like to share Korea's commitment for clean air for blue skies. Last week, Korea passed the law on carbon neutrality, the measures and air pollution reduction, and measures to reduce fine dust became a part of the bigger actions toward carbon neutrality. Republic of Korea hosted the Partnership for Green Growth and Global Goals Summit last May, and air quality in the city, SDG Goal 11, was discussed in the special session in the context of the climate change and sustainable development. Korea committed for the success of the coming Glasgow COP, and we also wishes to host COP 28 in 2023. And actually, this is our second attempt to host the UNFCCC COP, and we really hope that we can have an opportunity to host COP 28 and continue to be a part of the global efforts toward carbon neutrality and sustainable development. Thank you for your attention.
Oh, wonderful, Jay. That was a great presentation and great information. Thank you very much. We've not got a lot of time left, but I'm going to ask some quick questions that people have asked because we did start a little bit late. Okay, first question is for Jane. Get ready. We hear that investment in air quality from ODA is extremely low. What strategies could help increase such investments in the context of sustainable development funding?
Thank you very much for the question, Christina. So this is covered in the recommendations of our report, and I also have a strong opinion about it. So 3 things from the report and 1 thing that I wanted to add. One thing is, number 1, I would say that we can show that aid works. So for example, funding for China and Mongolia, the development agencies and banks have done, has reduced air pollution significantly, and we've all seen the huge health, climate and economic dividends there. So show what works, show what's good, showcase great projects. Secondly, I think make air quality an explicit priority. One of the things, and have dedicated funding for it, even if that's a pot shared across health and climate teams. One of the things that we have heard quite a bit from development agencies and people who want to tackle air quality projects is that it's quite hard within either the remit of the health silo or the remit of the climate silo to do that. And they would need a dedicated fund to be able to invest in air quality directly. And there are development funders like the Swiss and foundation funders like the FIA Foundation who have been able to create those dedicated funds. And then thirdly, from the report, I think improving reporting of air quality outcomes and reporting of funding to air quality was quite difficult for us to pick out the projects that were relevant. The researchers' development initiatives had to pick through the data and how it was tagged because there was no official codes to be able to report air quality. So starting to really focus on that would really help. And the other thing that I would add from a personal perspective and based on some of the comments that the panelists have given today is to really make sure that all of the benefits are clear. I think that we very regularly talk about the co-benefits to climate change, of tackling air pollution. We all know about the health benefits of tackling air pollution, but the sort of things that Pushpan was talking about with regards to the economic benefits are very much underplayed. And there's evidence that air quality really affects children's education, either because schools are closed on very bad pollution days, or because kids can't concentrate, or in the longer term, because their brain health has been affected by being born in an area of high pollution. So it really underpins a lot of the work that funders do in other areas, and we ought to highlight those co-benefits a bit more.
Thanks, Jane. That's terrific. We had a question on low-cost sensors, which Gary has answered in the chat. Thank you. So hopefully everyone's happy about that. Maybe we can follow up. So Juliet has gone, but we can certainly ask her that question in terms of what practices we think that other governments should follow. And then perhaps as a final question to all of our panelists, the question is, in the post-COVID-19 recovery era, how critical is it for governments to align investments to actions on air quality and climate change? So if we just, maybe we start with you, Eloise.
Thanks, Andrea. I mean, I think COVID has only amplified the case for taking seriously air quality. And I think it's actually really shone a light on indoor air quality for people having to stay in premises that they don't ordinarily necessarily spend a lot of time in. So we think about domestic settings a lot more, and also the ventilation of all the buildings and places we spend time in has become a big priority. On the flip side, we've also seen where there have been lockdowns around the world and transport and cars have stopped moving, radical shifts to bluer, cleaner skies, which I think makes it's often seen that air quality, achieving it is too hard. So there've been moments to show that it can be done where the political will is there. So there's lessons to be learned, there's motivation, I think, really, and there's a big light to be shone on indoor air quality.
Fantastic. Thank you, Eloise. Gary, you're next.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think one of the things that we found in looking at these various actions that have been so effective for air quality is that most of the actions to improve air quality have multiple development benefits, whether it be climate mitigation, agricultural productivity, energy security, food security, and many of the revised investment strategies that are coming out of these green post-pandemic plans will alter patterns of economics such that you have economic growth. So I think that, clean investments, sustainable investments should be part of every green post-pandemic plan.
Excellent. Thanks, Gary. Pushpalm, do you have any comments you'd like to make?
Yes, thanks, Andrea. No, when people ask this question that, whether in the post-pandemic era, government will have the bandwidth or resource to allocate resources on pollution control, the framing of the question is not correct. Pollution or climate or biodiversity, they are the foundation of the economy. And if we don't pay attention, for example, we are talking about pollution. Pollution also decreases the real purchasing power of the people. Pollution, as Christina has mentioned in her chat box, it impacts human right, poverty, and incidence of inequality of all types. Now, any society which wants where you have less number of poor people, less inequality, less social unrest, there is no other way but to focus on climate pollution and biodiversity loss. Coming back to pollution, the answer would be that the framing of the economic recovery has to be different. The paradigm has to be different if we don't want to repeat, if we really want an economy where people are in the center, their well-being in the center. So saying that probably this investment in pollution is one more burden, or whether government will have resource, that is probably not the right understanding. Government are serious, they are understanding, and our role is also to bring the issues upfront that, hey guys, if you really want a post-pandemic era where this kind of things don't happen and people are happier, I think you have to allocate resources on pollution control. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And Jane, last quick comment from you before we finish up. And I'm going to leave it up to Jay after you. Go.
Thanks. I would say it's very important, and that the key messages for me to governments investing at this point are, number one, invest to save. We've heard from Pushpam and others that health costs and productivity costs will be massively affected if you don't tackle air pollution. So invest now and reduce your costs later. Number two, build back better. It absolutely needs to be now that we are tackling the infrastructure and funding the infrastructure that leads to a healthy planet and healthy people. And number three, I've posted a link in the chat there. Air pollution and people who've suffered with respiratory conditions as a consequence of air pollution are suffering worse from the effects of COVID. COVID and other similar viruses aren't going anywhere quickly. So to protect ourselves against the next pandemic, we very much need to tackle air pollution now as well.
Terrific, thank you. And Jay, did you want to make any observations before we finish tonight?
As I mentioned in my presentation, the 30 to 40 increase annually for the finest problem air pollution in Korea, and really reached $2 billion last year. And it is also part of the Korea's green recovery, green and resilient recovery. We call it the Green New Deal, and Korea is on the green and resilient recovery from COVID-19 is the key, and Korea is right on track. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. So this has been a really interesting session. I would like to sincerely thank all of our panelists for their time, for contributing their knowledge and information to this significant issue. I think there is no doubt that we actually have the wherewithal, the opportunity, and the ability to actually make some significant changes now. I actually think we know what to do. I think we actually need to make the decision and prioritise effort. And as has already been noted, air pollution is interrelated with these other issues, and we need to actually be considering them together. Again, what we'll try to do with any of the additional questions is answer them via email. So everyone, thank you very much for listening today. This has been a terrific second International Day of Clean Air for Blue Skies. And let's hope that we see some more blue skies soon. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night. Bye.